Welcome to Homegrown Tales, a live storytelling event held at Brews, 2 Pine Spring in Eureka Springs. The following was recorded October 1st, 2025. And now here's Zeek Taylor to introduce the program.
Welcome everyone, we're glad to see you. My co-producer and I welcome you tonight to Homegrown Tales. We are delighted to have as our special guest storyteller the multi-talented Shabana Kauser. And also with us tonight is guitarist Tim Hillwood.
I want to remind you all that all the stories that you will hear tonight are true, and they were lived and written by the people that will tell them to you. Our special guest musician tonight is Tim Hillwood. He is based near Eureka Springs, and he's a solo guitarist who is mostly known for original and unique guitar instrumentals. The fingerstyle pieces range from melodic folk to jazz to new age and other genres that sometimes defy a label. These compositions generally come from an intention to uplift and to inspire, and I'd say he reaches his goal nicely. Tim's guitar playing draws on many influences and fills the room with a wide range of his instrument. Tim Hillwood.
Let's hear it again for Tim. That's great. Our first reader tonight is my co-producer, Sandra Spotts. Sandra Spotts has written for several Arkansas publications and made 12 appearances telling her original stories on the internationally broadcast radio show Tales from the South. Sandra has a background in fine arts and began as a fiber artist. She has been an art teacher and has worked as a professional designer. For the past several years, she's called Eureka Springs home, where she continues her art as an abstract expressionist painter. Now here's my friend Sandra Spotts.
This story is called Pearl's Pie. Holidays in our family were defined by pie. Pineapple icebox pie meant Easter. Apple pie meant Independence Day. Coconut and chocolate ushered in Christmas. And Thanksgiving equated to pumpkin and Cairo nut pie. The latter is not pecan pie or, heaven forbid, pecan pie. It is Cairo nut pie. And the proper pronunciation must have higher inflection on nut, Cairo nut pie. And it must be made with Cairo syrup, no substitutions. These are Mama's rules for pie. My mother's self-esteem was in part defined by pie. Pie making was one of the few activities about which my mother ever expressed self-confidence. Her chocolate pie was divine. Her coconut pie was the gold standard by which all other coconut pies were measured. No other ever matched, much less exceeded hers, but the coup de grace was her Cairo nut pie. Whenever there was a church supper, her Cairo nut pie was there. Whenever there was a funeral meal, the Pyrex dish marked PRS on the bottom went calling. If a friend or neighbor, especially male, ever commented on her Cairo nut pie, she flew into action and delivered 2 pies within a couple of hours. She prided herself on having a special secret, which she would divulge only if compliments had been showered. She would lean in and explain, glowing, that she revised the recipe and cut the sugar by a 1/4 cup so that the filling would not be so sicky sweet. She might as well have been Madame Curie at that moment with all the pride she took in her discovery. As the years and dozens of pies went by, my parents' health began to fail, and they stoically hung on to living in their longtime home. Holiday gatherings were shifted to either my house or my sister's, but my mother would insist on helping out. "What can I bring? Would you like me to make a couple of pies?" We hesitated, but upon her insisting, always said, "Yes, that'd be fine." Another Thanksgiving approached. That year at my parents' house had been rife with safety issues. Water faucets left on, plastic dishes melted in the oven, doors left unlocked, and rejected suggestions of a move to assisted living. Plans were laid out to have the holiday at my sister's vacation home nearby. Our mother chimed in with the usual, "Want me to make a couple of Cairo nut pies?" Sister haltingly replied, "That's a lot of work for you, but that'd be nice. You know we love your pie." Husband and I drove over Thanksgiving morning, helped Dad into the car, and I held my breath as Mother shrugged off an offered hand and toddled out to the car with the precious offerings in a picnic basket. 2 Cairo nut pies as promised. As our family was finishing the feast, Sister and I took orders for a dessert. I hovered with a stack of dessert plates as she cut into the first Cairo nut pie. We served up the first piece to my husband, who was suffering from a stuffy nose and could not smell. He immediately filled his fork and closed his eyes, anticipating the ecstasy of the first bite. Sister and I began to gag at the noxious and all too familiar odor that came out and was released from the pie. I turned toward my husband in horror, giving him the cut signal to the throat, while Sister frantically waved her arms at him behind Mother. He looked at me with irritation, and being a man not given to subtlety, blurted out, "What?" I rushed over, grabbed his plate, and took off to the kitchen, avoiding husband's scowl. Sister, always a quicker study than I, came to my rescue. "Oh, we just forgot to add the rest of your dessert. You did want some of my pumpkin pie on that plate too, didn't you?" "Well, yeah," he replied, still looking puzzled at what had gotten into the sisters. Fortunately for my family's survival, everyone else had opted for either my sister's apple or pumpkin. Sister went into action, cut 2 huge pieces of pumpkin and apple pie, and slapped them down in front of husband, in hopes of stifling any more inquiries into our odd behavior. Had I known how difficult he would become and that we would eventually divorce, I might have been very, very slow at giving him that don't eat signal. Just saying. And then our question began. "So, Mama, where'd you get all those pecans?" "Oh, from Cousin Earl's orchards. He brought them and even cracked them for all of us. We've been storing them in the hall closet. They need to be in a cool, dry place, you know." Light bulbs began to click on in our heads. Another of our mother's seasonal rituals involves switching out the summer clothes for the winter woolens, which were bombarded with moth balls, moth flakes, moth spray, and moth cakes. I have marveled that Sister and I did not wind up at some point in childhood belly up with our limbs curled insect style on top of our bodies for the amount of naphthalene we've inhaled. Sister and I looked at each other in horror, both recalling that Mama always hung her best woolen coats in the hall closet, a cool, dry place. Mystery solved. My folks did not have a handle on the idea that pie ingredients and toxic chemicals probably should not intermingle. Not long after my husband's near-fatal encounter with Mama's toxic Cairo nut pie, Mama and Daddy finally relented and moved to assisted living where they would be safe from household mishaps, and the rest of the world would be safe from Mama's poison pie. Not long after that Thanksgiving, Mama couldn't tell us whether she had had breakfast or the name of that sweet lady at church who had asked about me, but she sure could tell you how to keep a Cairo nut pie from tasting so sicky sweet. Soon thereafter, sister, brother-in-law, and I helped our parents cope with the difficulties of growing older as best we could, and they lived into their 90s with grace as best they could. And now we kids, approaching that time of life all too fast, find that growing older and giving up those things you take pride in and love to do is in no way easy as pie. Our next reader is my Tales co-producer, Zeek Taylor. Zeek is a recipient of the Arkansas Governor's Arts Awards for Lifetime Achievement. He's appeared on the NPR show Tales from the South, and StoryCorps interview with Zeek is on file in the Library of Congress. A segment of the recorded interview aired on NPR's Morning Edition program. A documentation of his art career is now in the permanent archives of the Senator Pryor Center in Fayetteville. An Emmy-winning documentary filmmaker and producer will make a short documentary about Zeke's story and life in Eureka Springs. Filming will begin in late October. Zeek is a published author, and his most recent book is Out of the Delta, the anthology. Now here's Zeek.
Thank you. Included in my Out of the Delta book is a story about picking cotton. After the book was published, people began saying to me, that had to be awful work. I bet you're glad you don't have to do that anymore. The truth is, I really like doing it. This is the story. Jump down, turn around, pick a bale of cotton. I started picking cotton in 1951 at the age of 5. My grandmother, Eva Bell Harvey, had picked cotton all her life. I loved my grandma, and even if it meant working in the field, I wanted to do it with her. She made a little cotton pick sack out of a pillowcase for me, and she attached a colorful shoulder strap to it. The sack was just the right size for a little boy. When I got older, I went to the fields with friends, and I graduated to using much larger pick sacks. The sacks were made of heavy-duty canvas, duck, with rubber or tire reinforcement on the bottom to keep them from wearing out as they were being dragged on the ground. Sacks were available in 6-foot, 7-foot, and 9-foot lengths. Pickers placed a rock or cotton bow in one end of the side corner of the sack and secured it with a heavy wire loop on the exterior. The bow or the rock was at the very end. The wire loop allowed the cotton sack to be hung on a scale and weighed. At the beginning of the season, the cotton husks were hard on the hands. Some pickers wore jersey gloves with the ends of the fingers cut from the gloves. I always picked bare-handed. It didn't take long for my fingers to toughen and become calloused. When pokeberries were ripe, we would decorate our sacks with the bright purple juice from the berries. We would draw pictures on the pick sacks and write our names on them. That was our form of graffiti. Cotton farmers didn't want to pay for wet cotton. It weighed more on the scales. Workdays in the cotton patch started the minute the dew was off the plants. We were paid 3 cents a pound, $3 a hundred. Older pickers would work with 2 rows at a time, one on each side. I must say that it was back-breaking work. We would alternate between bending over and crawling along on our knees while we picked. Tall cotton not only weighed more, but meant a person didn't have to work as hard because they didn't have to bend over so far. In the South, the term walking in tall cotton also meant times are good and a person is successful. When a pick sack was filled, it was hoisted across the picker's shoulders and carried to the cotton wagon to be weighed and emptied. Lifting that filled sack was at times the hardest task of the day. We had to empty the sacks ourselves into the cotton wagon. A 9-foot sack could hold as much as 60 pounds. Emptying the sack in the cotton wagon was also difficult. At each weigh-in, the farmer would record the pounds picked by each worker. He would use a pencil to write the numbers down in a notebook. Even though I was a scrawny teen weighing about 110 pounds, I could pick between 300 and 400 pounds of cotton a day. We were paid in cash at the end of each workday. That meant I was making between $9 and $12 a day. Pickers would break for lunch midday, find shade, and eat with dirty hands. Each worker brought their own lunch. We called the noon meal dinner. It usually consisted of sandwiches, chips, or the ever-popular canned Vienna sausage. Sometimes my mother would make me a sandwich from leftover breakfast sausage and biscuit wrapped in tinfoil. In the heat, the sausage and biscuit sandwich would stay nice and warm. If the cotton farmer had crushed ice available in a tub, we were able to keep our Coca-Colas nice and cold. We pretty much knew which farmers would provide the crushed ice. Otherwise, we kept our drinks cold in thermos bottles. The cotton farmers did have water available for drinking. The water was in a large metal-lidded container with a spigot at the bottom. The water was cooled by a big chunk of ice, and we all shared the metal long-handled dipper to drink from. No one thought anything about sharing that dipper. Fields were picked 3 times. Workers preferred fields that offered first picking because its yield was the highest. When the fields were picked the second time through, there was less cotton to harvest. By the time of the last picking, the third time through, there wasn't much left, and most of the cotton bolls were rotten. That picking was called pulling. When we pulled cotton, we would strip the stalk and put the cotton along with attached hulls into the sack. For the first and second pickings, the cotton farmers wanted the cotton to be clean with no trash in the pick side. That's the way the cotton gin wanted it when it was delivered. Because the third picking was trashy, cotton weighed more when we pulled, and we received only 2 cents a pound. I could pull more than 400 pounds or more a day. Pulling was done in late fall when it was often chilly. If it was, we worked while wearing flannel shirts. I liked working in the fields and making money. I used my cotton picking money to buy school clothes, books, and school supplies. Also made enough at the age of 12 to buy a small horse. At the age of 14, with my cotton picking money, I purchased a small all-state motorcycle for $125 from the Sears catalog. And when I was 16, I was able to buy a 52 Ford for $300. I continued to pick cotton each fall until I graduated from high school at the age of 17. Back then, I thought life was good and that I was truly walking in tall cotton. I'm grateful for my early work experience. It taught me incentive. I learned that the harder I worked and applied myself, the greater the rewards. It was a valuable lesson that I still try to apply to my life today. I'm still walking in tall cotton. Thank you. I am delighted to introduce the next reader, Shabana Kauser. She's one of my favorite artists, fine artist, very fine. If you've heard her read, you know that she's also a gifted storyteller. Shabana Kauser is a visual artist now living and working in Fayetteville, Arkansas. Her contemporary paintings of South Asian women wearing traditional clothes and jewelry share not only her personal journey, but those of past, present, and future generations of immigrants. Shabana's parents left Pakistan-occupied Kashmir in the 1970s and immigrated to England. With the long-standing history between England and Pakistan, they took the opportunity to set up a new life. Dealing with complications of the immigration system in the 1970s, they made a tough decision to follow the journey with hope of change. Shabana is one of 5 children they raised in the suburbs of London. Her father works in the steel industry and later at a bakery. Shabana's mother started a sewing business from home. Her mother used the skills she learned in her family home in Pakistan and applied that to create a business, all while raising a family. Shabana lived in the UK for almost 30 years. She lived in central London, where she achieved her degrees, a Bachelor of Science degree in Business IT and a postgraduate degree in information management. She worked in the corporate world before her husband was presented with a work opportunity in the U.S. In 2008, Shabana moved from central London, UK to the U.S., and lucky for us, settled in Fayetteville, Arkansas. Through the frustrating immigration laws, and while being unable to legally work for 7 years, she discovered her love for creating. The journey opened up a new way to connect with people and share her story. She's self-taught. This is her art. I could go on and on about it. Her story is fascinating, but I'll let her tell you more about herself. Here's my dear friend, Shabana Kauser.
Thank you. Arriving at art. I always get asked the question on how I started out as an artist. It's something that's hard to put into one quick sentence. So here's a short story. In my early teens, at secondary school in the UK, art was one of the subjects I loved. There was no right or wrong. It was a time to lose myself in colours, shapes, subjects, and all while physically working towards something. Other relatable subjects I gravitated towards were woodwork, or known as craft, design and technology back then, textiles, and home economics, or the cooking class. At the age of 16, as expected, like many teenagers around that time, I graduated secondary school, and then I began full-time employment. I didn't dare to even run the idea of studying anything creative past my family. Coming from a working class immigrant background, I was encouraged to focus on what paid and prioritize financial survival. I later worked in the corporate world and obtained my degree and master's degree. I never thought about creating as a young adult, as I was too focused on paying bills. I worked in corporate jobs, pushing paper and staring at screens. Later in life, and with our move to the US, I was left feeling lost for several years. While I was unable to work due to visa restrictions, and I waited for my green card and trying hard to stay sane, I spent my time volunteering with local organisations, carrying out projects around our home, and going to every single social event I could find. I still struck boredom and that feeling of detachment in our new home. I had days when I would feel optimistic and try another new idea to stay busy, and then other days I would hit a depressive state. I had come to one of my lowest points in our new life, and somehow found that fight and said to myself, come on, one last try for something new. My lowest point got me thinking about my time at secondary school in the UK and how art was one of my favourite subjects. I realised there was nothing stopping me from creating now. I had more than enough time to explore and purely learn. I found a painting workshop in Fayetteville instantly, and it was due to begin in a few weeks' time. Perfect timing. My first day of the workshop, and the class had about 10 students. Our instructor was a local artist and mentor. This 12-week workshop ran classes from 9 a.m. to noon and once a week. As the weeks went by, the number of students changed, and I got to meet different age groups and people from varied backgrounds. We selected an image to work from to create our first oil painting and began learning. Over the next few years, I began to throw myself into the arts. I started to visit any local art show I could find within Northwest Arkansas. I observed and I networked. Alongside my regular gym classes, house projects, and art workshops, I started to enjoy a consistent schedule. I instantly felt better within myself, as I had a purpose. I decided to start creating enough paintings for a formal art show in the future. It was a distant dream at the time, but it gave me a purpose. Time flew by quickly, and my green card finally came through. I was offered my first art show as soon as I got my green card. I had created paintings of iconic faces and had enough to feature in a 2-person formal art show. The thought of doing my first art show was intimidating. Would anyone even turn up? Could I really call myself an artist? Was my work worthy to be featured alongside a known regional artist? The thought of selling something didn't even cross my mind. I was focused on enjoying its experience and to take anything away from it. Now that was something I could control, so my intention went there. I started promoting the opening reception as best as I could. I worked with the limited knowledge that I had and put in as much energy into the behind-the-scenes tasks. March the 31st, 2017, I arrived to the opening reception in downtown Rogers an hour early to help set up any last-minute things and excited to see my work on the walls. 5 minutes before the advertised reception time, to my surprise, a group of the first guests arrived. This group of ladies asked about my work and how I discovered art. That was an easy question to deal with, and to my relief, I was happy to share. At the time, I had no clue who these ladies were. I later learned that one was a well-known curator, the others were art collectors always on the lookout for new work. After that group, the evening was flooded with guests, and later, some were even pouring out the front door. The energy was electric, something I was by no means expecting. The evening flew by with conversations, a celebration of 2 artists, and amongst the perfect spring evening temperatures in Arkansas. I was now connecting with community in a whole new way, and I enjoyed it. Oh, and my biggest shocker, I even sold art. I got to sit down and catch up with the other exhibiting artist and the gallery owner right at the end of the evening, and about half an hour past the official closing time. That was an excellent sign, if any. This particular evening gave me a whole new vision. I wanted more of this and was excited about putting in the work. Driven by adrenaline and perhaps a bit of stupidity, I needed more of a challenge. I decided to create something more authentic to my voice and life experiences. I talked this basic idea through with a wise artist friend and voiced my fear of sharing my culture in Arkansas. With all the art shows I had visited, I noticed there was a lack of representation of the South Asian culture. Was it unappreciated? Was I missing something? I had fears of experiencing discrimination. My friend's advice was powerful and honest. She didn't mince her words and instantly said, "You can't change who you are. The people who don't accept you are going to feel that way regardless of what you do." Those words gave me the confidence to start a whole new series, which now involved real-life models, fabrics, and my own reference images. I thought about my childhood and my mother sewing traditional South Asian clothes for the many women in the UK. I had my sister ship me some traditional fabrics from the UK. Once I got them, I began thinking about what I could create and relating back to memories. By now, I was approached by another gallery curator and invited to exhibit new work in a group show. I was nervous as I had not put paint to canvas yet and was given a very short deadline. The curator encouraged me to create 2 smaller paintings. That kick-started me, even if it wasn't in the comfort zone way that I wanted. I created my first ever portrait of my eyes, and the portraits can be seen here. These are prints. The first one is wearing a traditional scarf, and it was originally created on an 8-inch by 8-inch canvas. The second painting was on a 12-inch by 12-inch canvas. It featured a model with heeled shoes, Western denim jeans, and traditional fabric to showcase the fusion of fashion often embraced by women. The original paintings were finished and delivered to the gallery in time. Deep down, I was a little nervous about how my work would be perceived. I went to the opening reception during Fayetteville's monthly event, known as First Thursday back in 2017. To my surprise, I could see people stopping to observe my paintings, smiling and pointing. My next big leap was that I did my first artist talk later that month and received nothing but encouragement from the community. From that gallery exhibition, without hesitation, I worked from one opportunity to the next, adamant on showing my work in places that seemed unobtainable. Fast forward 8 years later, many shows and paintings later, it's a joy to stand here with you and share this story while I currently have work exhibited in a museum, university and city hall. I still think of the wise words that were handed to me. You can't change who you are. The people who don't accept you are going to feel that way regardless of what you do. Do it anyway and attract better quality people to you. Thank you.
Next we have Zeek back to tell us another good story.
In the arms of the ghetto. After teaching public school for a couple of years in the early 70s, I decided to return to school to further my studies in art. I was fortunate to have been accepted as a student in the prestigious Memphis College of Art, where I enrolled as a painting major. The small college did not have on-campus housing, and I was excited about having my own apartment, a single guy in the city. Before the semester started, I drove around Midtown Memphis and searched for apartments in the area where the college was located. I found a not-so-fancy, affordable-looking apartment complex that was within walking distance to the school. There was a sign out front that stated a one-bedroom was available for $60. I rang the office doorbell, and I was promptly greeted by Miss Butler, the office manager. The office was not really an office, but Miss Butler's apartment that was decorated in a Chinese theme. She had more than one ceramic oriental lamp featuring Chinese figures posing under red pagoda-shaped lampshades. Her Pekingese dog sat by her on the couch while I signed the rental papers. If ever a person and pet looked alike, it was Miss Butler and her dog Chan. I immediately liked the soon-to-be landlady. After moving in, it wasn't long before I met many of my neighbors. About half of the residents living in the complex were students at the same school, and like me, they were living on a tight budget. My parents sent me $10 a week for groceries. I was able to buy all I needed for a week in the way of food and kept back a couple of bucks for beer. My diet consisted mainly of rice and beans. If any of the student residents were low on funds, we fed each other, and there were many potlucks that seemed like feasts to us. Several of the apartment dwellers were students who became my best friends. We hung out with each other, ate together, drank and smoked together. It was the 70s. We encouraged each other in our desire to make art. I could walk to school in less than 10 minutes via a large concrete drainage ditch that ran underneath busy Popular Avenue. The deep ditch was about 10 feet wide and lined with huge trees covered in ancient wisteria vines. When the vines were in bloom, the air was filled with this heavy, sweet scent. My walk would end up in Overton Park. The school, Brooks Museum of Art, the city zoo, and acres of old-growth forest were located in the 342-acre park. At night, raccoons from the park would use the drainage ditch as a pathway to our apartments and the garbage cans by our rear door stoops. From my apartment, I could hear the scream of peacocks from the zoo and the occasional roar of lions. Our back door stoops, located in the alley between apartment buildings, were popular places to sit, drink beer, and gossip. There was always something to discuss, and much time was spent guessing who was sleeping with whom and how many weeks the affair would last. A young, good-looking musician named Dewey and his girlfriend lived across the alley from me. I could watch them coming and going from my kitchen window. They wore glam rock attire and made a striking presence as a couple. One day I heard yelling in the alley. Dewey's girlfriend was sprawled out in the alley, mascara-stained tears running down her cheeks. while Dewey threw her belongings into the alley from the porch. Feather boas and sequin dresses littered the pavement. Dewey threw his girlfriend's shoes at her one at a time while she was lying in the alley. She had a lot of shoes. She loaded up her things into her car, drove off, and never returned. My neighbors and I spent days speculating on just what it caused the colorful breakup. No one was brave enough to ask Dewey. One evening, the sound of gunshots from a nearby apartment rang out, and soon the police showed up with rotating blue lights that illuminated the complex. During the loud domestic squabble, a woman in a nearby apartment fired at her living partner, missed her mark, and the bullet pierced a plaster wall and went into the adjacent apartment. No charges was filed, but Miss Butler did request that the couple vacate the premises. The couple did not get their deposit back. Across the street from the apartment complex was the old Jewish Community Center. Although a new center had opened in East Memphis, the large swimming pool in the old abandoned center was still filled with water and in operation. After a few beers, a few of my guy friends and I would scale the chain-link fence and go for nighttime skinny dips. The water was nice and cool and a refreshing way to cool off during hot summer nights in steamy Memphis. Most of our apartments were not air-conditioned. Even though financially it was one of the leanest of times, I had some of the best times in my life while living in the ghetto arms. My life was so rich with experience, and most importantly with friendships. It truly was the best of times. And once again, I would like to welcome my friend Sandra Spotts back to the stage.
This story is called Downtown. Sister and I climbed onto the bus, dropped our dimes into the till, and sat on the sideways bench seat near the driver. The bus stop was only a few yards from our house, and Little Rock's Main Street was bustling on Saturdays. The weekly trip for swim lessons at the YWCA was deemed safe for two little girls young enough to still play with dolls. Big Sister had the responsibility of remembering what buses to catch, while I only had to tag along. I spent the ride thinking about the fun we would have after swim lessons shopping on Main Street. At the next stop, an elderly black lady slowly boarded and walked all the way to the back seat, even though there were plenty of empty seats on her way. I looked at the separation of passengers in the back from those in the front according to skin color. I wondered why. After our lessons, our feet took us as fast as they could go to Main Street and into Woolworth's. We dashed downstairs to look at, but not buy, the newest Jenny doll clothes. We stopped at the cosmetic counter and bought a tube of Tangy lip balm to share. If we ground it onto our lips repeatedly, the slight tint of the pigment might show, or at least we imagined. We looked through the barrettes, headbands, and bows. We admired the wigs, but didn't dare try them on. We were clearly still little girls interested in dolls, but with the allure of teenhood in our sights. Once back upstairs, we slid onto the swivel stools at the lunch counter, and Sister ordered 1 chocolate shake and 1 grilled cheese, of course, to be shared. Just to ourselves, we had named it a downtown sandwich because it was fancy. Toasted, cut diagonally with frilly cocktail toothpicks securing a pickle slice to each half. While we waited, we swiveled on our stools, unaware that adults with dark skin, even those who lived and worked downtown, were not allowed to sit at the counter. I swiveled around and spotted the familiar signs above the 2 water fountains on the wall. White only. Colored. Again, I wondered why. Sister poured the last bits from the silver shake tumbler into our glasses, taking care, as she always did, to measure it equally. After draining every drop, We stopped at the candy counter, peering into the glass cases at every single delight. We settled on our usual, a quarter pound of maple nut goodies, probably the minimum purchase required, in one white sack. The treat came to be, and still is, our special symbol of sisterhood. We had plenty of time to walk slowly past the store windows, admiring the fashions. We played our own game we had dubbed Here's Me. It was a sort of race to pick the prettiest outfit and the mannequin you'd like most to be, and to claim it by yelling, "Here's me." Sometimes we transferred this game to the most recently delivered Sears catalog or the pattern book if we were with Mama in the fabric shop. We walked on and past the blind man selling pencils. Mr. Peanut was on the corner giving free spoonfuls of warm nuts. The aroma was heavenly, even after we'd stuffed our little bellies at lunch. We turned onto Capitol Avenue and spotted the banner, War Memorial, on our bus, climbed aboard, and settled in for the ride home. We'd had a fun day, as we had so many others, but this day was different. A crack in the shell of innocence surrounding me had begun. For the first time, I peeked through to see disparity in this world and to wonder why. I pulled the bell cord signaling our exit at the next corner. I walked the half block, happy to have a sister who was also my friend share the day, the downtown sandwich, and the bag of our special sister candy. And that's the way it has always been. We've shared triumphs and trials, both in our personal lives and in a sometimes beautiful but very unjust world. I'm forever grateful to have shared the ride with a sister who guided me through, never lost me, and always remembers the way. And now here's another wonderful story with Shabana.
Moving from the UK to the US with work visas came with a set of restrictions. I was unable to work for several years as I had to wait for my green card. My husband's visa, however, allowed him to freely work for the business that had sponsored him. Leaving behind a productive life in London to start a new life here left me constantly processing a mixture of emotions. Every so often, I would claim to return to the life that we had left behind, which was fantastic, by the way. My disconnection led me to visit the UK each year and sometimes twice a year. Most of my UK travel was solo, and a majority of the time I encountered random security checks at airports. Oh joy, and yes, ever so random. I went from being aware of racial profiling at airports to numbingly accepting that I had to ride through it. I eventually learned to apply humour in some situations, and please note, that's not out loud in an airport, this is purely in my mind. Before we emigrated and our past lives in the UK, we enjoyed travelling to the US once a year. Like most tourists, we spent time and money over a couple of weeks with the intention of returning to our daily lives. In 2007, we decided to visit New York, and it was the very first time there. After an 8-hour flight, we had the pleasure, I say with sarcasm, of waiting at the customs and border line. Back then, airport technology to check passports was far more manual. As we lined up after a weary flight, mixed with the excitement of experiencing one of the most iconic cities in the world, we finally made it through the wait and approached a customs officer who sat behind a desk. He took our passports and studied mine a lot longer than my husband's. Then, without any explanation, he did not approve us to go through. Instead, we were made to wait in a separate line where only one customs officer was available to check our passports as and when he got to us. It felt like an eternity standing in this long line, and my poor husband wondered what we had done wrong. I studied the people ahead and the people behind us in line. I could see only black and brown skin colours, wearing clothing from all around the world, including headscarves. My husband and I were standing there in our Western denim jeans and t-shirts. I guess my brown skin and South Asian name wasn't going to cut it, even with a British passport. Once we got to the customs officer, he asked for our passports, glanced at them for less than 10 seconds, and then told us to head through. That was it. That was our big additional security check. An intentionally intimidating and pointless task. My experience of sexism and racism has been present since I entered this world, but not so much for my husband. The flip side of this story is that for the very first time, my dear white husband with blue eyes and fair skin, who stood in this pointless line with me, got to unknowingly experience racial profiling firsthand. The endless material for jokes and dinner party stories where I can keep poking fun of him was an absolute lifetime gift. Humour, it's what gets us through. Back to life in the US and before I received my green card, and trying not to deteriorate. I would find flights on the last-minute deal websites, and I'd pick the cheapest time of the year to fly to the UK. On this occasion, my flight was scheduled to connect in Atlanta. My check-in at the local Northwest Arkansas airport was smooth and easy. Once I arrived in Atlanta and found my connecting gate, I felt like this was too good to be true. No random security searches? What was going on? I was still brown the last time I checked. Then here it was. I'd seen the boarding sign and went to board the plane and was told, "Ma'am, you can't board the flight just yet. Please wait to one side." Okay, I wasn't sectioned out individually, but collectively this time, and told to wait. Was this a sneaky new way to do random checks? I guess I'd find out. Eventually we lined up and slowly boarded the plane. I still felt a bit weary about my surroundings, trying to enjoy my travel and perhaps humour myself along the way. I found my seat that was in the centre of the plane and an aisle seat. To my right, and over the aisle, an elegant lady, perhaps in her late 20s, was seated by the window. She had given her 7-year-old son the outer seat. I could hear her speaking to her son with what sounded like an Eastern European language. Side note, living and working in London in the past had opened me up to many cultures, and knowing that the tone of some languages sounds harsher than what they mean was something I had learned a long time ago. And for the purposes of this story, I shall name the elegant-looking lady Olga. Olga sounded like she meant business, as she gave some direct instructions to her son. This boy settled in fuss-free and very quickly for the long 8-hour flight to London Heathrow. She then turned away to read her book in peace. The plane had not taken off at this time, and most of the passengers around me were now seated. I could see 2 men, dressed in all black clothing, speaking in walkie-talkies, charging down the aisle. I thought to myself, these random security checks have moved up to a whole nother level. They've sent the men in black this time. I sat there observing, with survival intentions and trying not to give away my nervous laugh. The men in black were looking down each aisle of the seats ahead. Their focus wasn't on me. As they got closer, they just looked at the floor ahead of my seat, like they were searching for something, and continued frisking the rest of the plane. 2 other people, dressed in all black, were now walking down the aisle, but this time at a far more relaxed pace, with passengers staring towards them and whispering. Olga was unbothered by all the fuss. Meanwhile, I had visions of the men in black scooping in and making me miss my flight. As they passed my seat, a tiny old man appeared to be walking behind them. He was around my height with hunched shoulders. he was greeting passengers. Okay, so the men in black weren't here for me. They were clearly his security. But who was he? As he walked closer, he naturally shook the hand of passengers in the aisle seats, and then others he was able to reach. At this point, I think I was just relieved not to be wrongfully mistreated. However, for collateral purposes, I decided to capture an image of this man on my cell phone, so I could share it if anything happened. Photo successfully achieved. And now the elderly man first went to Olga's seat. She refused to even look at him, let alone shake his hand. Olga's son asked her if he could shake the man's hand. Olga shooed him off and told him just to do it. I was stunned and dismissed cultural differences at this point. The elderly man turned to me. I could see his lips moving, but I couldn't hear what he said. He smiled at me. I smiled back and I shook his hand. Once he passed by my aisle and moved further down the plane, I turned to the young American couple in front of me. They had both greeted him, then whispered to one another in excitement. I guess they knew who he was. I turned to them and said, I don't mean to sound rude. I'm new to this country. Who was that? The couple were more than happy to educate me. As we spoke, Olga to the right side of me had now decided to observe the happenings and chose to listen in. The American guy said, "That's President Jimmy Carter," and then told me about how he had impacted the country. I smiled with amazement and then sat down with far more ease. Olga now turned to me, wondering who shook her son's hand, and asked with a very short, sharp question, "Who was that?" I replied, "That's President Jimmy Carter." Over the next few seconds, I experienced someone rapidly transform a stern energy into a big burst of enthusiasm with no hesitation. Olga's newfound personality even pushed her to crack a smile as she asked me ever so energetically if I wouldn't mind texting her the image of the president. I shared my collateral with her. I can't even begin to list the things I learned from this one experience. I can say I felt some form of kindness and inclusion amongst all the happenings of this flight. Thank you.
I told you she was great. I'd like to thank her for reading. She was so good. Our lovely audience, and for Brews to hosting this event. And once again, here's Sandra.
We thank you all for coming, and I hope you'll come and see us again. The next Homegrown Tales will be on December 3rd. It's always a Wednesday at 6 p.m. And our storytellers are going to be well-known local Bill Ott, and once again, the exquisite musician, Tim Hillwood. We appreciate you coming and hope you enjoyed Homegrown Tales. We do this as a gift to Eureka Springs and to our community, so we hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for coming.
You've been listening to Homegrown Tales, a live storytelling event held at Brews, 2 Pine Spring in Eureka Springs. Join us again next time for more Homegrown Tales.